There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the camouflage of a Tuesday night, or the quiet hum of a refrigerator, or the weight of a blanket in a cold room. You don't recognize them as pivotal until much later, when you look back and see them for what they were. The subtle turning of a tide, the almost imperceptible shift in the tectonic plates of your own small world. For me, that moment felt like the warmth of another person's breath against the back of my neck. It was the solid, unconscious weight of Liam's arm thrown across my chest, his body curled behind mine in the narrow space of my bed. In the deep blue twilight of my room, I lay perfectly still, a statue carved from anxiety and a fragile, terrifying hope. My own breathing was a shallow, controlled exercise, a desperate attempt not to disturb the fragile ecosystem that had formed around us. He was asleep, utterly and completely, but I was more awake than I had ever been. This, I knew even then, was the end of something. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of everything else. It was a beginning that had been a long time in the making, a story whose early chapters one hadn't even realized we were writing. I met Liam Asher during the first week of freshman year, in the chlorine-scented cathedral of the university natatorium. He was everything I was not. While I saw the world through the quiet aperture of a camera lens, finding solace in the solitude of the darkroom, Liam existed in the brilliant, overexposed sunlight of the world. He was a decathlete of social interaction, effortlessly charming, his laughter a loud, genuine thing that seemed to fill whatever space he occupied. On the swim team, he was our anchor, the one who could pull a victory from the jaws of a losing relay, his powerful form cutting through the water with a beautiful, brutal efficiency that I, a distant swimmer who relied on quiet endurance, could only admire from afar. He was a software engineering major, his mind as quick and decisive as his body, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had never had to seriously question his place in the world. I, on the other hand, was a creature of the periphery. My major was fine arts, with a concentration in photography, a choice that seemed to baffle the more practically minded athletes on our team. I found my language not in words but in shades of gray, in the interplay of light and shadow, in capturing the fleeting expressions on people's faces when they thought no one was watching. I was quiet, not out of shyness, but out of a habit of observation. I preferred to listen, to watch, to assemble the world from the pieces others left behind. My friendship with Liam, therefore, was a thing of gentle contradiction. It shouldn't have worked. We were two different species of person, drawn from opposite ends of the social spectrum. Yet, from the very beginning, he sought me out. It started in small ways. After a grueling practice, while others were loudly rehashing their lap times in the locker room, he would sometimes find me on the bleachers, quietly sketching in a notebook or reviewing shots on my camera. He wouldn't interrupt, not at first. He would just sit a few feet away, the silence between us comfortable, companionable. He seemed to understand, in a way no one else did, that my quiet wasn't a wall to be broken down, but a space to be shared. He would ask about my photos, not with the polite disinterest of an acquaintance, but with a genuine curiosity. He'd point to a stark, black and white portrait of a stranger on the street and ask, "What were they thinking right then, you think?" He saw the story in the image, the question I was trying to ask with my camera, and that was a form of intimacy I hadn't expected to find. Our friendship was forged in the liminal spaces of college life. In the library at 2 in the morning, surrounded by towering stacks of books, my art history texts spread out next to his impenetrable coding manuals. In the 24-hour diner after a swim meet, high on adrenaline and exhaustion, sharing a plate of greasy fries. On the long, silent bus rides to away competitions, where the drone of the engine was the only soundtrack to our quiet conversations. He had a girlfriend then, Sarah, a bright, bubbly girl from the volleyball team who was as much a part of the campus sunshine as he was. They were the golden couple, their future seemingly pre-written and perfect. I liked Sarah truly. She was kind and funny, and she made Liam happy in a way that was wonderful to witness. And I, the quiet friend, the observer, became a fixture in their orbit. the third point of a comfortable triangle. But even then, in the safety of that platonic structure, I knew. I knew from the way my stomach would clench when he'd greet me with a casual arm around my shoulders. I knew from the way I found myself cataloging the tiny details of his existence. The 3 freckles just below his left eye, the way he'd chew on the inside of his cheek when he was concentrating on a difficult line of code, the specific timbre of his voice when he was tired. I was falling for him, slowly and irrevocably, like a coastline giving way to the patient, persistent erosion of the sea. It was a hopeless, secret ache, a feeling I packed away in the most secure, light-proof box in my heart. He was my best friend. He was straight. And that was the end of the story. I learned to live with the quiet hum of that longing, to treat it as a part of my own internal landscape, like a distant mountain range that was beautiful to look at but impossible to climb. I never let it show. My camera was my shield and my confessional. I had hundreds of photos of him, laughing, concentrating, sleeping on the bus, staring out at the water. They were my secret testament, a silent conversation I was having with myself. We moved in together junior year, along with 2 other guys from the team. It was a logical step, a matter of convenience and economics. But for me, it was a daily exercise in discipline. Living with Liam meant living with a constant, low-grade awareness of his presence. I knew the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the rhythm of his typing from his room across the hall, the way he sang off-key in the shower. Our apartment was a shared territory, but our rooms were our own sovereign nations. His was a chaotic landscape of clothes, textbooks, and discarded energy drink cans. Mine was a minimalist sanctuary, my walls covered in my own black and white prints, everything ordered and calm. We respected these boundaries. The threshold of a bedroom door was an unspoken treaty line. We'd knock, we'd call out to each other from our respective doorways, but we rarely crossed into each other's private space without an explicit invitation. It was a system that worked. It was a system that kept me safe. It allowed me to maintain the careful illusion of a friendship that was just a friendship, nothing more. For 2.5 years, that illusion held. And then, in the middle of our senior year, the foundation of Liam's sunlit world cracked right down the middle. The shift began not with a bang, but with the deafening silence of a closed door. Sarah broke up with him. It was sudden, unexpected, at least to the outside world. She had been accepted into a graduate program in London, and he had been planning to follow her, looking for tech jobs there after graduation. It was their plan, the one they'd been building for 3 years. But she had decided she wanted to go alone. She needed to be on her own, to figure out who she was without him. It was a brutal, clean break, the kind that leaves no room for negotiation or hope. Liam didn't rage. He didn't yell. He simply retreated. The light in him seemed to dim, the vibrant colors of his personality fading to a muted gray. He went through the motions of his life, classes, practice, team dinners, but he was a ghost haunting the edges of his own existence. The door to his room, once perpetually open, was now always closed. The sound of his laughter, which had been a constant ambient noise in our apartment, vanished completely. At night, I could sometimes hear the low, muffled sound of his television, a desperate attempt to fill the crushing silence. He stopped eating with the rest of us, surviving on protein bars and coffee. His grades, once impeccable, started to slip. Our coach pulled him aside after practice, his expression a mixture of concern and frustration. Liam just nodded, his gaze fixed on some distant point over the coach's shoulder. He was adrift on a vast, lonely ocean, and none of us knew how to throw him a rope. I tried, in my quiet way. I'd leave a plate of food outside his door. I'd text him, "Hey, there's a documentary on Ansel Adams on tonight. Thought you might like it." I'd knock and ask if he needed anything. Most of the time, I'd get a quiet "No, I'm good, man," through the closed door. He was building a fortress around himself, and I didn't have the tools to breach the walls. All I could do was stand watch, my own heart aching in sympathy, my unspoken feelings for him twisting into a new and painful shape. It wasn't just longing anymore. It was a profound, helpless desire to heal him, to somehow absorb his pain into myself. Then, one night, about 3 weeks after the breakup, there was a soft knock on my door. It was well past midnight. I was at my desk, editing photos, the red glow of the safe light in my small, makeshift darkroom corner casting long shadows across the room. I opened the door to find Liam standing there, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He was wearing an old, frayed university sweatshirt and pajama pants. His hair was a mess, and in the dim light of the hallway, I could see the dark circles under his eyes. He looked exhausted, haunted. He didn't look at me directly. His eyes were fixed on the floorboards between us. "Hey," he mumbled, his voice rough with disuse. "Hey," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. "You okay?" It was a stupid question. Of course he wasn't okay. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes met mine. They were filled with a desperate, pleading sort of emptiness that made my chest constrict. "Can I?" "This is going to sound weird," he started, then stopped, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Can I just hang out in here for a bit? My room it's too quiet. It's too loud. I don't know," he let out a short, humorless laugh. "I'm not making any sense, no." "You are," I said immediately. "Of course. Come in." I stepped back, holding the door open wider. He shuffled inside, his movements hesitant, as if he were entering a foreign country. He didn't sit at my desk chair or on the small armchair in the corner. Instead, he just stood in the middle of the room, looking around at the photos on my walls, at the neat stacks of books, at the quiet order of my space. He looked like a castaway who had just washed ashore on a deserted, but peaceful, island. After a long moment, he gestured vaguely toward my bed. "Can I just sit there?" "Yeah, of course," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. This was new territory. The unspoken treaty of our separate spaces was being dissolved right before my eyes. He sat on the edge of the mattress, his back to me, his shoulders slumped. I went back to my desk, pretending to be absorbed in my work, trying to give him space, trying to make my presence as unobtrusive as possible. The only sounds were the soft click of my mouse and the gentle hum of my computer. The silence in my room was different from the silence in his. Mine was a chosen quiet, a peaceful, creative void. His, I was beginning to understand, was an aggressive, lonely one. After about 20 minutes of this quiet cohabitation, I heard a soft rustling behind me. I turned to see that he had lain down on top of my comforter, his arm thrown over his eyes. His breathing was slow and even. I watched him for a moment, a storm of emotions swirling inside me. He looked so vulnerable, so stripped of all his usual confidence. He had come to my room seeking sanctuary. He had come to me. He fell asleep like that. I didn't have the heart to wake him. I turned off my desk lamp, leaving only the faint glow of the city lights filtering through my window. I pulled the armchair from the corner, sat down, and watched him sleep until the sun came up. It felt like a sacred vigil. I didn't know it then, but it was the beginning of the ritual. The ritual became our new, unspoken normal. It didn't happen every night, but it happened often enough to become a pattern. A few nights after that first time, there was another soft knock. This time, he didn't bother with an excuse. He just stood in the doorway, a pillow clutched in one hand, his expression weary and lost. "Hey," was all he said, and I just nodded and stepped aside. That night, I offered him the bed and told him I'd take the floor with some blankets. He refused, shaking his head vehemently. "No, man, it's your room. I'm the one crashing. It's fine. The bed's big enough." My bed was a queen, not a king. It wasn't small, but it wasn't vast either. The idea of sharing it with him sent a jolt of pure terror and illicit excitement through me. But I saw the look in his eyes, the desperate need for simple human proximity, and I couldn't say no. So I agreed. The first few nights were a study in careful choreography. We lay on our respective sides of the mattress, a demilitarized zone of several inches stretching between us, our backs turned to each other. We might as well have been in different time zones. I would lie awake for hours, hyper-aware of his presence, of the sound of his breathing, of the subtle shifts of his weight on the mattress. My entire body was a tightly coiled spring of tension. I was terrified of moving, of accidentally brushing against him in my sleep, of doing anything that might shatter the fragile, ambiguous peace we had found. I was his harbor, his safe port in a storm, and I couldn't bear the thought of him thinking I might want something more, that my sanctuary came with an ulterior motive. But the body has a will of its own, especially in sleep. About a week into this new arrangement, I woke in the middle of the night to find that the neutral territory between us had vanished. He had rolled over, and his arm was draped across my waist. His face was buried in the space between my shoulder blades, his warm breath ghosting across my t-shirt. My first reaction was panic. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I should move. I should gently disengage his arm. I should restore the boundary. But I couldn't. The sheer, unexpected intimacy of it was paralyzing. The weight of his arm was both a comfort and a torment. It felt like an anchor, holding me in place, but it was also a brand, searing the truth of my feelings into my skin. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, barely breathing, until the sky began to lighten. Just before my alarm went off, he shifted again, rolling away from me, his arm falling back to his side. When we woke up, neither of us mentioned it. It became another unspoken thing between us, a ghost of a touch that haunted the space we shared. This became the new pattern. He would start the night on his side, and by morning, he would have migrated toward me, drawn by some unconscious gravitational pull. Sometimes it was just his hand resting on my hip, or his leg tangled with mine. Other times, like that first time, he would be fully curled around me, his body a warm, solid presence at my back. I started to learn the cartography of his sleeping form, the way his fingers would twitch when he was dreaming, the soft, almost inaudible sigh he would let out just before falling into a deep sleep. Each night was a tightrope walk for me, a delicate balance between the profound comfort of his closeness and the agonizing fear of what it did and did not mean. Was this just about his loneliness? Was I just a warm body, a human substitute for the comfort he had lost? The thought was a sharp, painful sting. It felt clinical, utilitarian. I was a tool for his healing, and once he was better, I would be put back in the toolbox, our friendship restored to its safe, platonic settings. This was the most likely scenario, the one my logical mind insisted on. But my heart, that foolish, traitorous organ, dared to hope for something else. It seized on the small things. The way that, even when we were awake, the space between us seemed to be shrinking. We'd be watching a movie on my laptop, propped up against the pillows, and our shoulders would be touching. He wouldn't pull away. He'd lean into it, just slightly. The way he started talking again, really talking, in the quiet darkness of my room. He'd tell me about his classes, about the frustration of a coding problem he couldn't solve, about his fears for the future. He never talked about Sarah. It was as if that part of his life was a locked room, and he was content to live in the rest of the house. In the darkness, with the world shut out, he was vulnerable, honest. He was the Liam I had only ever caught glimpses of before. The door to my room became a powerful symbol in my mind. When he first started staying over, he'd leave it cracked open, a signal to the outside world, to our other roommates, that this was a casual, non-committal arrangement. It was a statement of plausible deniability. But as the weeks turned into a month, then two, he started closing it. Not all the way at first, just pushing it until it was nearly shut. Then, one night, I heard the soft, definitive click of the latch. The sound echoed in the quiet room, a declaration. We were sealing ourselves in, creating a world that was just for us. Inside that room, in the shared space of that bed, the rules of the outside world seemed to fade away. There was no past, no future, only the present moment, the warmth of his body next to mine, the steady rhythm of his breathing. I lived for those nights, and I dreaded them in equal measure. They were a beautiful, exquisite torture. I was getting everything I had ever wanted, but on terms I didn't understand. The physical intimacy was becoming more deliberate. He would no longer wait until he was asleep to get close. He'd get into bed, turn to face me, and just lie there, looking at me in the dim light. Then, he would shift closer, draping an arm over my chest, and rest his head on my shoulder, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He'd sigh, a sound of deep contentment, and whisper, "Good night, Alex," And I would lie there, my body rigid with unspoken feelings, and whisper back, "Good night, Liam," while my mind screamed 1,000 questions into the void. What are we doing? What is this? Do you feel anything at all? Or am I just a convenient comfort? The silence that followed was always a canvas onto which I painted my own hopes and fears. My photography began to change. I stopped taking pictures of strangers. My focus narrowed, turning inward. My new subjects were the details of our shared space. The indentation his head left on the pillow next to mine in the morning, the way his sweatshirt was draped over my desk chair, the 2 coffee mugs sitting side by side on my nightstand. It was a visual diary of our strange, undefined intimacy. I was documenting the creation of a new world, a world for two, even if only one of us was aware of its significance. I felt like an archaeologist, carefully brushing the dust off a fragile, priceless artifact, terrified that a single clumsy move would shatter it into a million pieces. Our friendship was that artifact, and every night we spent together, I felt like I was risking its destruction for the sake of a warmth I was becoming increasingly addicted to. I was so afraid. Afraid of him waking up one day and realizing what he was doing, repulsed by the intimacy he had initiated. Afraid of him getting better, of his grief receding, and of him no longer needing the sanctuary of my room. But most of all, I was afraid of myself. Afraid that one night, I would break. That I would turn my head on the pillow, close the final inch between our faces, and destroy everything with a single, selfish act. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday night in late February. It had been a long, stressful day for both of us. I had a major portfolio review looming, and he had bombed a midterm he thought he was prepared for. The mood in the apartment was tense. He had retreated to his room after dinner, the first time he'd done so in weeks. The closed door felt like a rejection, a return to the old, painful silence. I sat in my room, the anxiety in my chest a cold, heavy weight. I assumed the ritual was broken, that tonight I would be alone. I tried to tell myself it was for the best, that this dependency was unhealthy, that we needed to return to our own orbits. But the thought of sleeping in my bed alone, after weeks of his warmth beside me, made the room feel vast and empty. Around 1 in the morning, just as I was finally giving up and getting into bed, my door creaked open. He didn't knock. He just appeared in the doorway, a silhouette against the faint hallway light. He looked wrecked. He walked over to the bed and sat on the edge, his head in his hands. He didn't say anything for a long time. I sat up, my back against the headboard, and waited. The silence was different this time. It wasn't comfortable or peaceful. It was stretched thin, vibrating with a tension that felt new and sharp. Finally, he spoke, his voice so quiet I could barely hear him. "I feel like I'm losing my mind, Alex. What happened?" I asked, my voice equally soft. He shook his head, not looking at me. "It's not just the midterm. It's everything. I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. Everything I thought I was, everything I thought I wanted, it's all just gone. It's like I'm a stranger in my own life." He finally looked up at me, his eyes glistening. "The only time I don't feel like that, the only time anything feels real or okay, is when I'm in here. With you." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and fragile. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. He was laying his cards on the table, even if he didn't understand the hand he was holding. I had to be careful. One wrong word could send him retreating back into his shell for good. "I'm glad you feel safe here, Liam," I said, choosing my words with surgical precision. He let out a shaky breath and lay down, turning on his side to face me. The space between us on the bed felt charged, electric. He didn't move closer, not yet. He just looked at me, his gaze intense, searching. It felt as if, for the first time, he was truly seeing me, not just as a friend or a comfort, but as something else. As a person who was right here, in front of him, sharing this impossible space. "It's more than safe," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. I don't know the word for it." He reached out then, his movement slow, tentative. He didn't touch my face or my shoulder. He just gently laid his hand over mine, where it rested on the comforter between us. His fingers were warm, his palms slightly calloused from the gym. The simple, deliberate contact was more earth-shattering than any of the unconscious cuddling had ever been. This was intentional. This was awake. This was a choice. We lay like that for a long time, in silence, our hands linked, our eyes locked. The entire universe seemed to have contracted to the space of my bed, to the few inches that separated our faces. I could feel the frantic pulse in my own wrist, right under his thumb. I wondered if he could feel it too. I saw 1,000 emotions flicker in his eyes: confusion, fear, vulnerability, and something else, something deeper that looked terrifyingly like my own reflection. Then, he spoke again, his voice barely audible, a thread of sound in the darkness. "Can I ask you something weird?" My throat was dry. I managed a single, hoarse word. "Anything." He took a slow, deep breath, as if steeling himself. His eyes never left mine. Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The question was a detonation. It shattered the silence, shattered the ambiguity, shattered the careful walls I had built around my heart for years. It was the question I had dreamed of and feared in equal measure. And it wasn't a proposition. It wasn't a move. It was a plea. It was a question that handed me all the power, that made my consent the most important thing in the world. It was the most respectful, terrifying, and beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. My mind went completely blank. All the analysis, all the fear, all the carefully constructed scenarios evaporated, leaving behind only one simple, undeniable truth. I didn't answer with a word. I simply tightened my grip on his hand and nodded. Just once. A small, almost imperceptible movement. But it was enough. He moved with an agonizing slowness, as if he were afraid I might bolt. He closed the small distance between us, his other hand coming up to gently cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His eyes were still open, searching mine, giving me one last chance to retreat. I didn't. I held his gaze. And then, he leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. It was not a kiss of passion or demand. It was a kiss of quiet discovery. It was hesitant, soft, and unbelievably tender. It was a question, an exploration, a confession. It tasted of uncertainty and a deep, aching loneliness that I recognized as my own. It lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. When he pulled back, he didn't go far. Our foreheads rested against each other, our breath mingling in the small space between us. His eyes were closed, his expression one of profound, fragile relief. I felt a single tear escape my eye and trace a path down my temple. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of a release so overwhelming it had no other way to manifest. After all the years of silent watching, of quiet longing, I had finally been seen. The story I had been telling myself, in the darkroom of my own heart, was real. The aftermath was a landscape of silence, but a new kind of silence. Not the ambiguous, tense quiet of before, but a fragile, stunned stillness. After the kiss, he didn't pull away. He simply shifted, wrapping his arms around me and pulling me close, burying his face in my neck. He held on to me tightly, as if I were a lifeline, and I held him back just as fiercely. We fell asleep like that, tangled together, the unspoken question finally answered. Or so I thought. When I woke up the next morning, the sun streaming through a gap in my curtains, the space beside me was empty. And cold. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, coiled in my stomach. He was gone. Not just from my bed, but from the apartment. His car was missing from its usual spot in the driveway. He hadn't left a note. He hadn't sent a text. He had simply vanished into the morning light, leaving behind nothing but the ghost of his warmth on the sheets and the lingering taste of his kiss on my lips. The beautiful, terrifying reality of the night before began to curdle into something sour and uncertain. Had I imagined it all? Had he woken up in the clear light of day and been horrified by what he'd done? The thought was a physical blow. I felt like an idiot, a fool who had mistaken a moment of desperate, grief-stricken confusion for something real. I had allowed myself to hope, and now the silence he'd left behind was my punishment. He didn't come back all day. He missed his morning classes and skipped swim practice. My texts went unanswered, each one a small, pathetic beacon sent out into a vast, unresponsive void. "Hey, are you okay? Liam, please just let me know you're safe. We need to talk by evening." My anxiety had morphed into a dull, throbbing ache of humiliation and hurt. Our other roommates noticed his absence, but they chalked it up to him being in a funk again. They didn't know. No one knew. The secret we had created in the dark was now my burden to carry alone. I felt exposed, as if the events of the previous night were written all over my face for everyone to see. He finally returned late that night, long after I had given up waiting and retreated to my room. I heard the front door open and close, his quiet footsteps in the hall. He didn't go to his own room. He went into the kitchen. I could hear the clink of a glass, the sound of the refrigerator door opening and closing. I lay in my bed, my door wide open, my heart pounding. I was torn between the urge to hide under my covers and the desperate need to confront him, to demand an explanation. After what felt like an hour, I made my choice. I couldn't live in this limbo. I needed to know. I found him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, staring into a glass of water. The only light came from the moon, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. He didn't look up when I entered. He knew I was there. The air was thick with everything that had been left unsaid. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice betraying a tremor I couldn't control. "Just driving," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Thinking about what?" I pressed, stepping closer. "About running away? About pretending last night didn't happen." The anger and hurt were starting to bubble to the surface, sharp and hot. He finally looked at me, and the expression on his face wasn't disgust or regret. It was fear, pure, unadulterated fear. "I don't know what happened last night, Alex," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't know what I'm doing. It felt like you knew exactly what you were doing." I shot back, the words sharper than I intended. "You asked. You initiated it. And now you're acting like I forced you into something, like it was some kind of mistake. It's not you," he said, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "God, it's not you. It's me. I'm so messed up right now. I just broke up with Sarah. My whole life just fell apart. And I don't feel this way about guys. I'm not gay." He said the word as if it were a foreign object in his mouth, something he wasn't sure how to pronounce. The words landed like a punch to the gut. So that was it. I was a symptom of his confusion, an anomaly born of grief. All my hopes, all the meaning I had poured into our nights together, it was all just a side effect of his trauma. The pain was so intense it was dizzying. I felt my carefully constructed composure begin to crumble. "So what was I?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "A placeholder? A warm body to get you through the night? Was any of it real, Liam? Or was I just the most convenient option?" "No," he said, shaking his head, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Don't say that. It's not like that. What I feel when I'm with you, it's real. It's the only real thing I've felt in months. And that's what's terrifying me. It doesn't fit into any of the boxes I have for my life. It doesn't make any sense." He started pacing the small kitchen, a caged animal. I told myself I was done. I was done with dating, done with girls, done with trying to figure out relationships. I just wanted to be alone, to get my head straight. He stopped and turned to face me, his expression a mask of desperate turmoil. "And then, there was you. There was this. Us. And it's the one thing I can't ignore, the one thing I can't run away from." Even though I spent all day trying, he took a hesitant step toward me, his eyes pleading. "I'm scared, Alex. I'm scared of what this means, of what people will think, of what I'm supposed to do with it. I don't have a map for this." He let out a long, shuddering breath. "But I know one thing. The thought of not having you, of not being able to come to your room, of that being the last time." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He looked utterly broken, utterly lost. And in that moment, my anger evaporated, replaced by a wave of profound, aching empathy. He wasn't rejecting me. He was wrestling with the foundations of his own identity. I had spent years coming to terms with who I was. He was being forced to do it in a matter of weeks, under the crushing weight of grief and expectation. He closed the distance between us, his movements slow, uncertain. Could we just... He started, his voice a raw whisper. Could we just try being us? Without a label? Without figuring it all out right now? Just this. He gestured vaguely between the two of us. Can we just see what this is? Please. It was a fragile, desperate plea. He wasn't offering me a perfect, pre-packaged relationship. He was offering me his confusion, his fear, his honesty. He was offering me the truth. And in a way, that was more valuable than any easy declaration of love. He was asking me to be patient, to meet him in this messy, undefined space and build something new from the ground up. I looked at him, at the man I had loved in silence for so long, and I saw not an object of my affection, but a partner. Someone who was just as lost and just as hopeful as I was. I reached out and took his hand, my fingers lacing through his. His hand was cold, but he gripped mine with a desperate strength. Okay, Liam, I said softly, the word of promise. Okay. We can just be us. A wave of relief washed over his features, so profound it was as if a physical weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He didn't kiss me again. Instead, he did something far more intimate. He leaned forward and rested his forehead against mine, just as he had the night before. We stood there for a long time, in the quiet, moonlit kitchen, holding hands, breathing the same air, two people who had decided to navigate the uncharted territory of their own hearts together. It wasn't the triumphant climax of a love story. It was something quieter, more real. It was a beginning. The days that followed our confrontation were a process of careful, intentional reconstruction. We were building a new kind of architecture for our relationship, one based not on ambiguity and unspoken needs, but on a fragile, growing honesty. The ritual of him sleeping in my room continued, but its nature had fundamentally changed. There was no more pretext, no more performance of platonic comfort. He would come to my door each night, not with a pillow clutched like a shield, but with an open, vulnerable expression. He was there because he wanted to be with me, and I was there because I wanted him. It was as simple and as complicated as that. The physical space between us and the bed was no longer a territory to be cautiously navigated. It became a shared landscape. We would lie facing each other, talking for hours in the dark, our conversations weaving from the mundane details of our day to the deepest fears we held about our futures. He told me about the pressure he felt from his family to follow a certain path, about the suffocating expectation to be the successful, uncomplicated son. I told him about my own insecurities, about my fear that my art was just a self-indulgent hobby, that I would never be able to make a life out of the one thing I truly loved. We were showing each other the parts of ourselves we had always kept hidden, the soft, vulnerable underbellies we protected from the world. The physical affection became more deliberate, more communicative. A hand squeeze in the middle of a difficult confession. A soft kiss on the forehead after a nightmare woke him up. The way he would pull me closer, tucking my head under his chin, his arm a secure, protective weight around me. Each touch was a sentence in a new language we were learning together, a language that said, I am here. You are safe. We are in this together. It was a language built on presence and patience. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give, and I never demanded labels he wasn't ready to claim. We existed in the quiet, gentle space of us. Slowly, tentatively, our private world began to bleed into the daylight. It started with small, almost imperceptible gestures. His hand resting on the small of my back as we navigated a crowded hallway. The way he'd save me a seat next to him at team meals, an unspoken declaration of alliance. Our roommates, I think, noticed the shift, but they didn't comment. They saw that the light had returned to Liam's eyes, that he was laughing again, that the oppressive cloud of his grief had begun to lift. They saw that he was spending nearly all his free time with me. Perhaps they drew their own conclusions, or perhaps they simply accepted it as a facet of our close friendship. It didn't matter. Their silent acceptance gave us the space we needed to let our new reality take root. One afternoon, I was in my darkroom, the red light casting its eerie, monastic glow over everything. I was developing the prints from the roll of film I had shot during those weeks of our ambiguous ritual. The photos of his pillow, his sweatshirt, the two coffee mugs. I was looking at an image of the morning light hitting the empty space on the bed where he had been lying. A photo I had taken on that awful day he had disappeared. It was a picture of absence, of longing. As I watched the image slowly emerge in the chemical bath, I felt a presence behind me. It was Liam. He had slipped in so quietly I hadn't heard him. He stood behind me, his hands resting gently on my shoulders, his chin on my head, as we both stared down at the developing print. "I remember that morning," he said softly, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "I was so scared. I felt like I was breaking everything I touched, especially you. You didn't break me," I said, my eyes still fixed on the photograph. "I was just scared you were going to leave." He was silent for a moment. Then he reached around me, his hand finding mine in the cool tray of developer. He gently lifted my hand, ignoring the chemicals, and brought it to his lips, kissing my fingertips. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. He turned me around to face him, his eyes serious in the dim, red light. "I know I haven't said it. The words are still hard for me. They feel too big. But I need you to know. This, with you, it's not a phase. It's not a reaction. It's you. It's always been you, I think. I was just too blind to see it." He leaned in and kissed me, a real kiss this time, deep and sure and full of a certainty that chased away the last of my shadows. In the quiet sanctuary of my darkroom, surrounded by the ghosts of our recent past, we finally found our footing. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we'd learned to create together. The door to my room was now always closed at night, not as a barrier to the outside world, but as the entrance to our own. It was no longer a symbol of denial, but a declaration of intent. This space was ours. This life we were building, moment by quiet moment, was ours. Some homes, I've learned, are not made of wood and nails, but of shared glances and patient hands, and the profound, grounding peace of knowing that you can be your whole, messy, terrified, and hopeful self with another person. Liam had come to my room seeking a temporary harbor from a storm, and somewhere in the quiet darkness, without either of us quite realizing it, we had ended up building a lighthouse. A place to guide each other home, for good.